Zurich had dedicated their life to knowledge. Hailing from the Relit, a species deeply rooted in intellectual pursuits and peaceful philosophies, Zurich was known across the Galactic Federation as one of its finest teachers. Zurich traveled between worlds, imparting wisdom on technology, philosophy, and the importance of peaceful coexistence. They believed that through education, the galaxy's many species could overcome their differences and find harmony. For years, Zurich's lessons were met with eager ears. They spoke to species across the stars, planting seeds of unity and understanding. But not everyone appreciated Zurich's ideals. The Vranic, the dominant species in the Federation, were far from peaceful. The Vranic ruled through sheer military might, subjugating weaker species and expanding their empire through force. They had little patience for teachings of peace and equality, as it directly threatened their hold over the galaxy. Zurich's influence began to grow, and the Vranic took notice. What began as a mere whisper of discontent soon turned into a ripple throughout the Federation. The species Zurich had taught were starting to question their rulers, thinking perhaps there was another way, a path that did not involve submission to the Vranic's iron grip. This was dangerous. The Vranic, with their brutal regime, could not tolerate ideas that might undermine their authority. It didn't take long for the Vranic to devise a plan. Zurich needed to be silenced, but an outright assassination would draw too much attention. Instead, they plotted something far more insidious. Under the guise of a prestigious research mission, they sent Zurich on a deep space expedition to a distant, uninhabitable planet. Officially, Zurich was to study the planet's unique ecosystem, but in truth, the Vranic ensured there would be no return. As Zurich's ship neared the planet, the sabotage became clear. Systems began to fail, communications were cut, and the ship plummeted uncontrollably toward the surface. Crash landing on the barren, hostile world, Zurich found themselves alone. The planet, devoid of life, was harsh and unforgiving. With limited supplies and no way to send a distress signal, survival seemed impossible. Days passed, and the reality of the situation sank in. The Galactic Federation, controlled by the Vranic, offered no help. Zurich had been abandoned. Messages went unanswered, and slowly, hope began to fade. They had dedicated their life to helping others, to spreading knowledge that could unite the galaxy, yet in their moment of need, no one came. The isolation gnawed at them. Zurich reflected on the irony of it all, a lifetime spent teaching the virtues of unity, only to be left for dead by the very powers they hoped to change. The species they had once taught were too afraid of the Vranic to act. Fear had taken hold of the galaxy, and Zurich had become just another casualty of the Vranic's ruthless ambition. In the silence of that forsaken world, Zurich came to terms with their fate. They had seen this galaxy for what it truly was, broken, divided, ruled by fear and force. It seemed that no matter how much they had tried to teach otherwise, the galaxy was content with its chains. Alone on the desolate planet, Zurich struggled to keep going. Every day was a battle for survival. The air was thin, barely breathable, and the temperature swung from unbearable heat to freezing cold. Food and water were scarce, and what little they had salvaged from the wreck was quickly dwindling. The planet itself seemed hostile to life. There was no sound, no vegetation, just endless barren landscapes that offered no hope of shelter or escape. Zurich's thoughts turned inward. The silence was deafening, leaving them with nothing but time to reflect. They had spent years teaching peace, unity, and the importance of cooperation between species. They had believed so deeply in the power of knowledge that it could bring the galaxy together, make it a better place. And yet, here they were, abandoned, forgotten by the very galaxy they had served so faithfully. The betrayal was a sharp, constant ache. How had it come to this? Zurich had always known that the Vranic were oppressive, but they had underestimated just how far the ruling species would go to maintain control. The Galactic Federation, once a symbol of unity, was a hollow shell, manipulated by fear and power. Every species that could have intervened, that could have helped, had turned their backs, afraid of what aiding Zurich might mean for them. The questions started to consume Zurich. Had their teachings been worth anything at all? Was the pursuit of peace even possible in a galaxy ruled by such cruelty? Zurich had dedicated their life to spreading knowledge, believing it would inspire others to seek a better path. But now, stranded and alone, it seemed like all of it had been for nothing. The galaxy had shown its true face: indifference, apathy, and the triumph of fear over morality. Days turned into weeks, and hope flickered out, little by little. There was no rescue coming. There was no Federation response, no loyal students defying the odds to save their teacher. It was a lonely, slow decline, and Zurich prepared for the inevitable end. They would die here, forgotten, on a barren rock at the edge of nowhere. Even if someone discovered their body, it would be too late. Then, one day, something changed. Zurich had almost given up, resigned to their fate, when a small, unfamiliar vessel appeared in the planet's sky. At first, Zurich thought it was a hallucination, a cruel trick of their mind in the final stages of despair. But the ship was real, and as it descended closer, Zurich's shock turned to confusion. It was a human vessel. Humans? Of all species, why them? The galaxy had long dismissed humans as primitive, underdeveloped, hardly a power to be taken seriously. Their technology lagged behind that of the larger empires, and they held no significant political sway in the Galactic Federation. Zurich had taught many species over the years, but humans had always been regarded as an afterthought, plucky survivors, sure, but never contenders in the grand scheme of galactic politics. And yet here they were. The ship landed, and the hatch opened to reveal a small group of humans. They weren't soldiers or high-ranking officials. They looked like explorers, scientists, perhaps even amateurs. Their gear was rudimentary compared to the high-tech equipment of other species, but their faces showed something Zurich hadn't seen in a long time: determination. These humans, despite knowing full well that they were in hostile territory, had come to help. They had intercepted Zurich's faint distress signal by chance during one of their exploration missions. And unlike the rest of the galaxy, they had chosen not to ignore it. Zurich's disbelief only grew as the humans approached, offering supplies and assistance. There was no hesitation, no calculation about what rescuing Zurich might cost them politically. They simply saw a life in need of saving and acted. It was an impulse Zurich had seen so little of in the galaxy, a raw, unfiltered sense of right and wrong, unburdened by the fear that had paralyzed so many others. The human crew, led by a soft-spoken commander, worked quickly to stabilize Zurich's condition. They didn't ask for anything in return. When Zurich asked them why they had come, their answer was simple: because you needed help. There was no grand philosophy, no complex justification. They had simply done what they felt was right. Zurich, who had spent a lifetime debating the intricacies of morality and peace, was taken aback by the humans' straightforwardness. It was as if their compassion wasn't something to be earned, but something that came naturally to them. In that moment, Zurich saw something in the humans that the rest of the galaxy had missed. They might not have had the most advanced technology, or the most powerful military, but they had something far more important: a moral code that couldn't be bent by fear or intimidation. The humans had defied the silent cruelty of the galaxy, not for gain, but simply because they believed in helping others. They had come to rescue a being most of the galaxy had written off, without asking why no one else had bothered. As Zurich began to recover, they realized that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy hadn't been lost after all. Perhaps it was the humans, this small, underestimated species, that could teach the galaxy something it had long forgotten. The planet was far more dangerous than it appeared. The moment the humans began their rescue, it became clear that every step forward would be a battle. The atmosphere was thin and toxic in certain pockets, forcing the humans to ration their oxygen carefully. Sudden, violent storms rolled in without warning, carrying deadly winds and cutting visibility to nearly zero. The surface was fractured with deep ravines that threatened to swallow their equipment with a single misstep. Each problem seemed insurmountable, and Zurich, watching from the sidelines, couldn't see how these humans, who had so little compared to the rest of the galaxy, could possibly succeed. Zurich, having spent years traveling between worlds, knew well the dangers that planets like this one posed. Survival here required advanced technology, precise equipment, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The humans had none of these. Their ship was barely holding together, their tools crude compared to what Zurich had seen from other species. Surely, they were doomed to fail. Zurich didn't want to doubt their rescuers, but it seemed impossible for them to navigate the perils of this world and live to tell the tale. But as the humans set to work, something unexpected happened. They adapted. Where more advanced species might have relied on highly specialized tools, the humans used what they had, repurposing every bit of equipment to suit the challenges at hand. A length of cord became a lifeline across a deadly chasm. Simple metal panels, hammered and reshaped, turned into makeshift shields against the storm. When faced with equipment failure, they didn't pause to complain or retreat. Instead, they found solutions on the spot, improvising in ways that Zurich hadn't imagined possible. Zurich's skepticism began to wane as they watched the humans work. Their determination was unlike anything Zurich had ever witnessed. They didn't hesitate, didn't falter, even as the situation grew worse. It wasn't just brute survival, there was a method to their madness. Zurich realized that the humans were seeing things differently, finding angles and approaches that others would have overlooked entirely. At one point, when an essential piece of navigation equipment broke down, Zurich was certain that would be the end of their efforts. Without it, the humans had no way of guiding their path through the unpredictable terrain. But instead of despair, the humans calmly took out a star map, began calculating trajectories by hand, and used the planet's natural landmarks to continue the mission. To Zurich, who had always relied on the precision of advanced tech, this seemed like a leap of faith. But for the humans, it was second nature. They had evolved in a world where they had to make do, where ingenuity was as valuable as any machine. It wasn't long before Zurich found themselves warming to these strange, resourceful beings. Despite the odds, they pressed on. There was an optimism in the way they worked, a sense that they truly believed they could succeed, no matter how dire the situation. Zurich had known many species who would have given up by now, who would have turned back or simply accepted failure in the face of such overwhelming obstacles. But the humans? They seemed to thrive in this chaos. Their perseverance was infectious. Through the danger, they never lost sight of their goal, saving Zurich. Each human took turns supporting the mission, never letting fatigue or fear get the better of them. When one faltered, the others picked up the slack. They moved as a unit, bound not by orders or hierarchy, but by an unspoken trust. Zurich couldn't help but feel a growing respect for them, and for the first time since the ordeal began, they allowed themselves to believe that rescue might actually be possible. Then came the final test, a massive storm, unlike any the humans had encountered before. The winds tore across the landscape, ripping apart everything in its path. The humans had to act fast. The ship, already damaged from the initial landing, wouldn't survive another direct hit. They had no choice but to finish the rescue and leave immediately. With the storm closing in, there was no time to waste. Despite the chaos, the humans remained calm. They pulled Zurich through the final stretch, bracing against the violent winds and debris. The ship's systems groaned under the strain, but the crew held together, each person contributing to keep it operational. Zurich had never seen such teamwork in the face of certain doom. With the storm threatening to overtake them, they made one last push. The humans, battered and exhausted, refused to quit. They fought their way to the ship, dragging Zurich on board just as the first wave of the storm crashed into them. For a moment, it seemed like all might be lost. But with sheer determination and a last-minute burst of ingenuity, the humans managed to get the ship airborne, barely escaping the planet's grip. As they soared away from the hostile world, Zurich sat in awe. They had been wrong about the humans. These beings, whom the galaxy had dismissed as insignificant, had just achieved the impossible. They had faced down nature's wrath, their own limitations, and the very real possibility of failure, and yet they had never once considered giving up. Zurich, who had once doubted their abilities, now realized that it wasn't just technology or knowledge that set these humans apart. It was their spirit, their refusal to accept defeat, even when the odds were stacked against them. The galaxy had underestimated them, but Zurich knew now that they shouldn't have. The humans had something far more valuable than advanced technology. They had the ability to survive, adapt, and rise above any challenge thrown their way. News of Zirich's rescue spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The return of the revered teacher was nothing short of a shock, especially to the Vranic. They had orchestrated everything perfectly. Zirich was meant to disappear, their influence meant to fade into obscurity on that barren planet. Yet now, against all odds, Zirich had been saved, not by any major galactic power, but by the humans, a species that most considered weak and insignificant. The ripple effect of this news was immediate. Whispers traveled across worlds, and soon those whispers became a roar. How had the humans pulled off such a daring rescue when so many others had turned their backs? And more importantly, why had they done it? The Vranic were furious. Zirich's survival posed a serious threat to their control. If Zirich's teachings spread once again, especially with the story of betrayal at the Vranic's hands, it could undermine their authority across the Federation. To them, the humans were nothing more than an inconvenience, a species barely worth noticing. But now, they had become a symbol, one that could ignite resistance against the Vranic's oppressive rule. In response, the Vranic launched a full-scale political offensive. They couldn't outright admit to their sabotage, but they could discredit the humans. They labeled the rescue as reckless, illegal, and dangerous, spinning the narrative to portray the humans as irresponsible meddlers who had interfered in Federation matters without permission. The Vranic painted themselves as victims of human hubris, claiming that humanity's actions were a violation of galactic law and order. They sought to isolate humanity even further, ensuring that no other species would consider supporting them. But the humans were not intimidated. Despite the Vranic's political power and their attempts to smear humanity's reputation, the humans stood by their actions. They didn't have the military might or diplomatic clout of the major galactic players, but they had something far more important, a moral stance. When the Federation Council demanded an explanation, the humans simply told the truth. They had found someone in need, and they had acted. No species, no government, and no law could justify leaving someone to die, especially when it was within their power to help. They hadn't sought permission because doing the right thing didn't require it. Zirich, now fully recovered and with the platform of a respected teacher, did not remain silent. In a public statement that reverberated across the galaxy, Zirich openly sided with humanity. They recounted the Vranic's betrayal and their abandonment on the desolate planet, revealing the truth behind the so-called accident that had left them stranded. Zirich condemned the Vranic for their oppressive rule, declaring that it was only the humans, this small, underdog species, that had dared to act with compassion when the rest of the galaxy looked away. Zirich's words had a profound effect. Many species, especially those who had long chafed under the Vranic's dominance, began to question the established order. Zirich's teachings about unity, cooperation, and the moral responsibility of every species to help one another gained renewed attention. Small, weaker species who had once feared speaking out against the Vranic's tyranny now saw a glimmer of hope in humanity's defiance. The humans had proven that even the smallest voice could make a difference, that courage wasn't measured by power, but by the willingness to act, even when the odds were against you. The Vranic tried to tighten their grip, launching further campaigns to suppress Zirich's message and to vilify humanity. But the cracks were already starting to show. The more they pushed, the more other species began to see through their tactics. It wasn't just about Zirich or the humans anymore. It was about the entire structure of the Federation, the way power had been concentrated in the hands of a few while the rest were left to suffer in silence. The Vranic's retaliation only highlighted their desperation, and many began to wonder if their rule was as secure as they claimed. Meanwhile, humanity's role in the Federation began to shift. Where once they were ignored or belittled, they now found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Zirich's endorsement had given them a legitimacy they had never had before, and more species started reaching out, offering support. It wasn't a revolution, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. The humans, through their actions, had started to inspire a sense of solidarity among the galaxy's oppressed. They had shown that it was possible to stand up to the Vranic, to defy the status quo, and to act with conscience rather than fear. Humanity, for its part, did not try to claim leadership or demand recognition. They didn't see themselves as heroes. They had done what they believed was right, and they would continue to do so, regardless of the consequences. Their refusal to back down in the face of the Vranics' intimidation sent a clear message. They could not be controlled through fear or coercion. In the corridors of power, the Vranics' hold remained strong, but beneath the surface, the tide was beginning to turn. Species that had once been divided by fear of the Vranics' wrath now found common ground in their admiration for the humans' bravery. The Federation was no longer the unified body it pretended to be. The humans had exposed the cracks in its foundation, and those cracks were growing. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long. The Vranic had tried to crush them, but instead, humanity had lit a spark. It wasn't just that the humans had saved Zurich, it was that they had reminded the galaxy of what it meant to stand for something greater than yourself, to act not out of fear, but out of conviction. Zurich's rescue wasn't just a momentary victory, it was the spark of something much larger. Once Zurich was safe, their message spread farther and faster than it ever had before. They were no longer just a teacher, but a symbol of resistance against the galactic oppression that had been silently festering for years. As stories of the humans' bravery circulated, more species began to listen to Zurich's teachings with renewed interest. And this time, they weren't listening out of academic curiosity or detached philosophical interest. They were searching for hope. Humanity, once seen as the galaxy's underdogs, found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Their actions had spoken louder than any words could. They hadn't fought for power, glory, or political gain. They had acted out of compassion, risking their own lives to save someone abandoned by the galaxy. That kind of courage resonated deeply with species who had long been crushed by the Vranics' rule. Slowly, these species began to rally around the humans, seeing them as allies who weren't driven by self-interest but by a genuine sense of justice. Zurich, ever the teacher, didn't waste this opportunity. They continued their life's work, but now, humanity stood as their strongest ally. Together, they toured the galaxy, speaking to any who would listen. Zurich's teachings of unity, peace, and mutual cooperation spread like wildfire, bolstered by the living proof that humanity had acted on those ideals. Zurich's relationship with the humans deepened, becoming one of mutual respect and partnership. They shared their wisdom with the humans, while the humans, in turn, brought their practical ingenuity and resilience to the cause. It was an alliance no one had seen coming, but one that was growing in influence every day. The Vranic, meanwhile, found themselves on increasingly shaky ground. Their efforts to discredit Zurich and humanity were failing. Each attempt to paint the humans as reckless backfired as more species began to openly question the Vranic's oppressive regime. Civil unrest broke out on the edges of the Vranic Empire, where smaller species, emboldened by humanity's example, began to resist. Protests and uprisings followed, challenging the Vranic's dominance in ways that hadn't been seen in centuries. Where once the Vranic's militaristic might had kept the galaxy in check, now it seemed as though their power was slipping, the cracks in their empire widening by the day. In response, the Vranic doubled down on their control, but it was too late. Their empire, long built on fear and oppression, began to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. More and more species, fed up with the status quo, began to align with humanity and Zurich. What had once been a fringe movement now gained momentum, becoming a galaxy-wide call for change. The Vranic had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. For the humans, their rise in stature wasn't about seizing power. It was about doing what was right. They hadn't set out to become major players in galactic politics, but through their actions, they had become exactly that. Species who had once looked down on them now sought them out as allies. Their bravery in the face of overwhelming odds had earned them a respect that no amount of political maneuvering could have achieved. Humanity wasn't just seen as another species, they were seen as a force for good in the galaxy. As the Vranic Empire faltered, the galactic order began to shift. Species that had long been isolated under the Vranic's oppressive regime found new hope in the unity that Zurich and humanity represented. New alliances were formed, not out of fear or convenience, but out of shared values and mutual respect. The humans, who had once been outsiders, now found themselves at the heart of a growing coalition of species committed to change. In the end, it wasn't technology, military might, or political cunning that changed the galaxy. It was humanity's compassion, their willingness to risk everything for the sake of another, that had sparked a revolution. They had proven that the greatest strength wasn't in force, but in standing up for what was right, even when no one else would. The fall of the Vranik wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling, as more and more species chose to break free from their control. The galaxy, once tightly gripped by fear, began to breathe easier as the cracks in the empire widened. It would take time, and the road ahead was still uncertain, but the Vranik's dominance was fading. And in the midst of this change, humanity stood tall, not as conquerors, but as symbols of a new era. As the galaxy adjusted to this new reality, the final reflection became clear. The humans had been underestimated from the beginning. They were never the most advanced, the most powerful, or the most feared species. But their moral courage, their refusal to abandon those in need, had set them apart. They had changed the galactic order not through force, but through compassion. In a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to truly care for one another, humanity had become the reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could change the course of history. And so, humanity's rise wasn't one of conquest or dominance, it was one of leadership through example. They had shown the galaxy that strength didn't always come from power, but from the willingness to do what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. That, in the end, was what made humanity exceptional. They hadn't just saved Zurich, they had reignited the hope that a better galaxy was possible.